This is the Outlap F1 podcast featuring America's own Cody, Andy, and Deanna. Your one-stop shop for Formula One news, insights, race previews, and reviews. Join us on the Outlap.
I would say that was worth the 90-day wait. Holy Hannah, what a race. You've got the Outlap F1 podcast. This is season 7. This is episode number 3. It's our first race review of the season. It's the 2025 Australian GP race review show. You have got Andy, and I'm along with Cody tonight, and we are, I think, finally have recalibrated our sleep schedules. I don't know. It may take until Wednesday, and then China's going to come and just destroy it all. But anyway, it's the life we choose to lead. Cody, my man, how's it going, and how you doing?
It is going great. I slept in really late today to get my recovery in. It was definitely worth staying up late for it, though, because, like you said, holy crap, what a race. I don't know what I was expecting for the first race this year, and it had me on the edge of my seat several times, so well worth it.
Yeah, we are going to talk about the day that Mother Nature showed up and the literal lap that Mother Nature decided to show up and test everybody. And I do mean tested everybody. So we're going to get into all that in just a little bit, but we've got an entire weekend also to talk about as well. So if you have found our show, and a lot of you have actually over the weekend, we have kind of gotten Blue Sky up and going. It was nice to get some nice interaction with some folks over the course of the weekend. So if you have found us for the first time, welcome along. We're glad you're here. You can find us on that Blue Sky app or Twitter, still X. We're still putting content on over there. I was doing a lot of dual posting across both platforms over the course of the weekend. So if you enjoyed some of the content, again, we're glad that you did. So you can find us there, Instagram, Discord, Reddit, and of course, YouTube. At Outlap F1 Podcast is the handle for all of that. See our link tree as to where you can find all of our content. If you're on YouTube and you happen to like what you're hearing and you enjoy what you're watching, you can click the like or the subscribe button. That would also help us out. If you're on your favorite podcasting app, a 5-star review also helps us out to come up a little bit better in search results. Helps us get our content to you that much quicker. So if you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, we would appreciate that. Email the show. You can always do that. Chat now at outlapf1.com. Outlap F1 Nation, who continues to support the show. Thank you so much to all of our monetary supporters, including Dean Warwick, Yuri Goldchester, Paul Weaver, Quentin Warden, Kevin Kelly, Regan Stanzik, Timothy Brown, and of course, Jonathan Scott. If you'd like to become a member of that hashtag Outlap F1 Nation, we put our anchor page in all of our show docs or show notes as well. You can see it there. $1, $5 all helps us to maintain the equipment we have, get some new equipment into the program, all in an effort to try to keep the show as technologically relevant as we can. All right. Well, we will just hop right in because this weekend was just kind of felt like that. We just kind of all hop right in. We're going to start with our headlines of the day. Cody, what you got?
I've got McLaren won as expected, but what a wild ride it took to get there. After qualifying, McLaren looked ominously quick. We all thought after testing that they were going to be the best car. They were downplaying themselves a little bit, saying, I don't think we're going to be that far out ahead. And then in qualifying, they ended up being quite a bit ahead. And during the race, they looked like they were going to be really, really ahead. But the race got really nuts several times. And at the end of the day, the gap to the front was very small.
Yeah, just when you thought you were done, you had one more round of potential heart attack to come. I think the appropriate question in my headline is, I think the question is, what didn't happen in this race? I think we got, if you are an F1 fan or if you are even new to the sport, you pretty much saw just about everything. You saw crashes before the race. You saw some people crashing in the race. You saw weather, changing, tricky conditions. And oh yeah, we even had some stewarding things that happened after the race that changed the result, just in case, you needed one of those as well. So you got your cross-section of what the sport has to offer. And that rain, boy, when it came, it changed just about everything. Some fortunes rose, others fell. We will talk about all of that. But before we do that, we will start, as we are apt to do, with our qualifying recap. So Saturday, which was dry, it was run in the dry. It was actually very hot, a little bit cloudy, but dramatically different weather to Sunday. And it saw... All right, going out in Q1, this poor guy had himself quite the weekend. I felt so bad for him. Ollie Behrman in the Haas did not set a time as his car was in parts yet again. P19 was Esteban Ocon. Ouch. Both Haas cars pushing up the back of the grid here. That's not a good result considering they did no quali runs in testing. P18, Liam Lawson. Ouch again. The second Red Bull seat still in the back. P17, Nico Hulkenberg. Kick Sauber. Yeah, a little bit better. At least they beat Red Bull. Let's look at that. P16, Kimi Antonelli almost made it out of Q1, but P15, Gabriel Bortoleto put together one hell of a lap at the end of Q1 to knock Antonelli out. P14 was Jack Doohan. P13 was Lance Stroll. P12, Fernando Alonso. P11, one of the stars I thought for qualifying for me, Isaac Hadjar on debut, almost cracking the top 10. The top 10 from 10 to 1. P10, Carlos Sainz. Williams' form looks to be real, but only able to get in P10, but others did a little bit better for Williams. P9 was Pierre Gasly. P8, Lewis Hamilton on debut for Ferrari. P7 was Charles Leclerc in the other Ferrari. So Ferrari's not looking quite as competitive as we thought that they would, especially coming out of testing. P6 was Alex Albon. There's the good form for Williams showing up. Pretty much, I think, all of the potential that car had. Good going for Albon. P5, other star of qualifying, Yuki Tsunoda in the Racing Bull. I saw a lot of memes says, Helmut Marko, would you look at him now? Great effort in Q3 and not even shown on television. It just kind of happened. He was the last guy to set a lap time. P4 was George Russell. P3, getting absolutely, I thought, everything out of the car was Max Verstappen. P2 was Oscar Piastri, who took a dramatic last lap lead, only to be pipped by his teammate in pole position, Lando Norris, with a 1:15.096. Wow. First qualifying in the session of the season. Sorry, I'm not quite in mid-season form. I will get better, I promise. But Cody, big takeaways from the qualifying.
There was a lot of big takeaways. First competitive session of the year, and we'll start at the front. It looked pretty close, actually, between just about everybody. You know, those top four teams, Ferrari, as I'll get to in a second, Ferrari maybe not looking as great, but between McLaren, Red Bull, and Mercedes looked pretty close right up until those last times in Q3 where both Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri opened up a pretty sizable gap to the rest. And that was the first point where I was like, maybe this isn't going to be as tight as we were all hoping for. And we saw a little bit more of that in the race. So I think it is pretty ominous what McLaren has managed to do with the car. You know, there's plenty of room for development throughout the season, but they're definitely starting off on the right foot.
Although they did not make it easy on themselves. Both Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, Oscar almost had an off, and Lando did have an off and had his lap time deleted. So going into the final runs, they were P4 and P10, respectively. And then all of a sudden, you know, the last lap, they both nailed both of those laps, and they were so close to each other. I think 8/100ths of a second, which is nothing. But they did manage to open up a gap, 4/10 to Max Verstappen. And I thought Red Bull did a wonderful rally job. They brought something like 15 updates to the car since testing. So whatever they obviously identified something that wasn't working, and they obviously fixed a lot of the problems. It's not all their problems, but they certainly addressed a lot of them, at least allowed Max to do the Max thing and be a factor. And he was right there up until the end. But yeah, like you kind of did mention, the two McLarens did manage to pull a little bit of a gap in qualifying. I'm more and more excited the more I see it. So early advantage, I'll definitely take that. Other notes, didn't see the Ferraris. I think everybody thought Ferrari would be a lot more competitive. Both of them, some issues in Q3. It looks like they went a little direction in setup that probably didn't agree with the car. And you still got Lewis Hamilton kind of learning the car as we definitely saw throughout the course of the race. George Russell, I thought, was impressive in the Mercedes. And again, Yuki Tsunoda, probably the star of the qualifying session. Who saw that one coming? I think both racing bulls looking very good in quali.
Yeah, both, let's see here, both Yuki Tsunoda and Alex Albon looking really good at qualifying, out-qualifying both of the Ferraris. So anyone who was hoping that Ferrari was going to come into this where they left off last year, just on McLaren's heels, I'm sorry to say, you're probably going to be disappointed for at least the first few races.
Yeah, there's definitely some development that I think both Ferrari and Red Bull are going to have to probably put into this car. I don't think they can just close up shop and focus on 2026 if they want to be a factor this season. But yeah, the Williams form, I mean, Carlos Sainz was topping sessions, especially early, even in practice. We kind of saw that even in testing, that he had the ability to do that. Just didn't put together a Q3 lap. Otherwise, I think he would have been right there with Albon in that maybe 6th or maybe 5th position. Certainly Williams early on, definitely punching above their weight. And that, I think the vowels effect is a real thing. Watch that team, especially next season. But I think they're going to turn some heads this season for sure. All right. So we shall flip over the script and get into the now very, very wet Sunday. It was so wet, in fact, that the F3 race got shortened because the epic rain showed up. And then the F2 race didn't happen because the epic rain showed up. And when I mean epic rain, trying to watch this broadcast, they stayed on the air for about an hour and a half. They tried to get this race in. They went out 3 different times. It was bad. Every time it seemed like they would get a break in the weather, another wave of water would come in and it just, trounced all over the track. I was not sure this race was actually going to start on time. I was actually very worried about it. But right after the F2 race kind of got called, it eased up. It eased up a bit. It eased up a lot. So that even by the time we got to the race, the vast majority of just about everybody was on Inter tires. So, at least we were able to get a normal start. We started on time. But then it all kind of kicked off early. We will start with our back markers. There are a lot of DNFs here, and a lot of them are drivers that don't have a whole lot of experience, but it kind of didn't matter. This race kind of claimed just about all levels of experience, believe it or not, from rookies to some of the more experienced drivers who've been driving for a very, very long time. So we're going to start with the first DNF. That was Isaac Hadjar. Tragic story of Isaac Hadjar in this race. Did not set a single lap because he crashed on the formation lap. Very, very kind of difficult scene to see. He was very, very upset about it. Also not classified with Jack Doohan, Carlos Sainz, Fernando Alonso, Gabriel Bortoleto, and Liam Lawson. At different points throughout the race, the conditions got to one or all of them. The only 2 in the back markers who actually finished were the 2 Haas's. Oliver Behrman, who finally actually got some laps in, and Esteban Ocon. So that concludes kind of the back markers, but there's a lot in here. I guess we can kind of start with Hadjar. Cody, take us through what you saw there.
What we saw in this race was like a baptism by fire for most of the rookies, and it was pretty ugly there in the beginning. We saw Isaac Hadjar not even make it around to the starting grid because he spun off during the formation lap, which is really unfortunate. You could see on the broadcast that he was really gutted by what happened. I'm sure he was hoping to make a much more impactful debut than that, especially since he qualified quite well for his Formula One debut. And that just, that all went out the window before he even had a chance at a racing lap. However, it was pretty cool because Denny Hamilton, Lewis Hamilton's dad, was shown on the broadcast trying to comfort him. I guess Hadjar is a really big Lewis Hamilton fan, so that was good to see. You have to have a little bit of compassion for the guy. He's only 20 years old. He's really young. He's trying to make it at the highest level of motorsport, and when something like that happens, even someone who's tough as nails is going to be feeling that. So. I felt really, really bad for him on that. Jack Doohan didn't make it a whole lot farther because he spun out on the first racing lap and his car was pretty well wrecked. So that isn't going to help his case a whole lot. We've been talking into the lead up to this that there's a pretty good chance that Jack Doohan isn't going to be staying in that seat for the whole season, which is really too bad because those conversations started before he'd even really had any chance to show anything. And this was a bit of a rocky start to that. So I'm sure we're going to hear those conversations just keep going and going. But it was not just the rookies. Carlos Sainz went off on his own during the safety car. I think I'm like lap 2. So he didn't really get to show what he could do in the Williams yet. Fernando Alonso went off quite a bit later in the race, but also went off on his own. There were parts of the track where it was very slippery. We saw a lot of issues with people kind of skimming into the gravel trap at one point on the circuit. A lot of drivers had issues with the slippery white lines on the track. So there are a lot of them because this track is not a dedicated racetrack. It's public roads, most of the year. So there's a lot of lines on the track. And yeah, it was rough for everybody. I don't remember exactly when Liam Lawson went out, but Gabriel Bortoleto went out like pretty close to the end of the race and had the chance to really impact the finish.
The Lawson spin was at the same time as the Bortoleto one. So they both kind of wrecked together and caused what turned out to be the last and final safety car. But yeah, I mean, Alex Albon, I was listening to an interview he gave after qualifying, and they all mentioned the rain. Somebody mentioned the rain, and he just looked up and said, yeah, it's going to be a tough day for the rookies. And he was very, very right. Hadjar had the spin, obviously, before the race started. Doohan had a similar spin on the first actual racing lap. Carlos Sainz couldn't keep it behind the safety car. Some sort of torque setting gave him a whole lot of extra power he was not expecting. Fernando Alonso, it looked like just a product of maybe some worn intermediate tires because everybody at that stage of the race was trying to make their tires last because there was threat of more rain. The Bortoleto one, it looked like he had survived most of the big part of the weather, and he had gotten back onto the inner tire, and again, he just had a moment, I think, on a white line. And Liam Lawson, who tried so hard, and at one point was actually up to P9, and then kind of throws it away again, helping to cause the final safety car. It was such a tricky, changeable race. I think Martin Brundle even said every corner there was an opportunity to have a crash. And the 16 drivers that survived, or the 14 drivers that ended up surviving it, were the ones who survived it from attrition, because I think everybody at least had a moment. Max almost had a moment. Antonelli, who we're going to talk about in a little bit, he had a full spin. Leclerc had a full spin. Piastri, we're going to definitely talk about what happened to him. Lando had a thing. You can go up and down. I maybe the only ones that I don't know about are ones that didn't make TV. I didn't see Lance Stroll, but I'm sure he had to have a moment or two. And I didn't see much of Hulkenberg. But, other than that, I think everybody who even finished this race had almost an oh crap moment.
Yeah, you got to definitely, with all the rookies and really anybody who retired from this race, we're going to hear a lot of conversation over the next week about several of them, particularly, probably Lawson, Doohan, Hadjar. And I feel like those conversations might be a little unwarranted because you're throwing these drivers into the deep end of the pool with this type of race. It would be hard for them to make an incredible debut on a completely dry track. And they had changeable conditions, wet track. They had it all. So despite the fact that they, did look a little clumsy, I think it's almost expected. And I think we need to see what they can do in like a normal dry weekend, dry qualifying where it's not super hot, because that was a big, contributing factor to weirdness in qualifying was it was really, really hot that day. And a dry race, we need to see something like that before we really start making judgment calls on, is Liam Lawson really the person who should be in that Red Bull seat? Does Isaac Hadjar deserve to be in the We're going to hear that this week, one way or the other, but I
hope not, but I think you're right. The other thing I will say about that is a lot of these guys, especially if they came up from up F2, one thing I will point out is F2 has only one compound of wet tire. They only have a full wet. They don't have an inter. So this is the first time that any of these drivers, and don't forget, even though it did rain for 2 hours in Bahrain, and I think maybe Behrman went out on a set of inters. Nobody else even brought inters. Yeah, nobody else even brought inters. So these guys have not even tested on that tire. And, oh, by the way, there's a new Pirelli full wet that the first time we all saw it was when they went out to do their recon laps after the wave of water had hit the circuit. So, you talk about deep end of the pool. This is about as deep as you can get. And I'm not surprised that we had a lot of attrition. And yeah, I think experienced, inexperienced, to me, nobody should be making a whole lot of super judgments about anybody, whether or not they finish this race. This was, I think, again, Martin Brundle, I thought, said it best, just a race of survival more than anything. All right, so we will move into the midfield, and there was plenty to talk about in the midfield as well. P12 unable to convert the great qualifying form, probably something to do with the weather. That was Yuki Tsunoda. P11 was in the points until the very end, and then he had it off at turn 1, and that kind of ruined the rest of his race. Pierre Gasly and the Alpine, so they get out of here without any points. P10. Boy, we heard a lot of interesting team radio for one Lewis Hamilton, basically all trying to work out how to work with his new engineer. And I think Lewis's tactic was, will you leave me the hell alone and let me drive the car? But he only manages to come home in P10. We will talk about the Hail Mary that Ferrari almost pulled off in this race when we get to the lap 44 incidents, because there were lots of them. P9 recovering after one of the most heartbreaking spins I've ever seen for a local driver. He was probably on for the win. My prediction would have been almost perfect. He only manages to come home in P9. But I'll tell you, you want to talk about a recovery drive. Oscar Piastri pissed off is a dude. And because the move he pulls on Hamilton at the end, again, I'm telling you, this guy's got some mega overtakes in his racecraft. Oscar Piastri in P9. We will talk about his adventure. P8, Charles Leclerc, spin and recovery. Again, another Hail Mary strategy that didn't quite work out. Only managed to come home in P8. P7, everyone else screwed up, and this guy got lucky. Let's be honest here. I don't think this is really Kick Sauber's form, but hey, you finish where you finish, man. Nico Hülkenberg in the Kick Sauber comes home in P7. P6, Lance Stroll. Here's another guy. Don't think really that's where they're at, but again, you got to give it to them. This is where they finish. Lance Stroll and the Aston Martin. P5 was Alex Albon, and P4, we will talk about him as well. Andrea Kimi Antonelli on debut, up from P16 on the grid to finish P4, a restored P4, which we will talk about in just a little bit. All right. It was a crazy midfield for sure. We had some guys definitely not where we thought they were going to finish. Cody, big takeaways here.
I think we have to tell the story of how some of these drivers ended up where they at, like Piastri, Hamilton. I think we have to kind of go through at least the broad strokes of the sequence of the race there. So we had So I'll try to set the stage a little bit here. So we started off, we were definitely in wet conditions, intermediate tires. There's the couple of wrecks before, there's the run wreck before the race happens, and then there's the doing wreck. And then we actually kind of finally, after about 8 or 9 laps under the safety car, actually got a few laps in and kind of settled in. And we were getting to a point where there was definitely a dry line that was clearly visible, that was definitely forming, because the rain, while there were some smatters of rain here and there, nothing super significant. We definitely got a dry line. So the question was becoming strategy-wise, do you want to come in and box for another set of enters? And if so, or do we want to go back to slicks? Because if you go to slicks, you're only going to be able to really operate in that dry line, but it's going to be significantly faster. So as all of the strategy is slowly playing out, now the ominous weather message comes in from the teams to their drivers. Expected rain class 3, which is very, very heavy,
There's only 4 classes. This is class 3 out of 4. So this is like big, what in Forrest Gump terms, this would be big old fat rain coming to the circuit. And everyone had at that point switched to the slick tires, especially after the Alonso spin and safety car. So that was, I think, safety car number 3 on the day. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, I was kind of amazed at that point that everyone ended up on the slicks, because they had been talking about how the rain was coming, and they had been trying to stick it out on the inters, despite the fact that a lot of drivers were overheating on the inters. You could see a lot on the broadcast, Lando Norris and Max Verstappen having to go offline to try to cool off the tires. It did look kind of promising early on for those 2 drivers, because Max was doing, we'll talk about it later, doing a decent job of keeping up for a while. But everyone's inters were starting to wear out. But they were kind of hemming and hawing, like, is it worth it? It's supposed to rain soon. And then after that, Fernando Alonso crash, and they went to the safety car, everyone ends up on slick tires, which I thought Haas was going to go for, like, the Hail Mary on this one, because they looked like for a minute there that they were going to be staying on inters. And I was like, oh man, like, that's kind of a wild call if you can make it work for a few laps, because you'll be on inters if it starts raining. Everyone who just switched to those slicks, which was literally everybody else, is going to be going way slower, and you might look like geniuses. But then, kind of like at the last minute, they decided to pit for slicks anyway, which I thought was kind of silly. It's like, why didn't you do that earlier? If you're going to go for it, you really got to go for it. But, they pulled back on that. So, yeah, like you said, everyone on slick tires. And then it actually does start raining, and having everyone on slicks as the rain was coming down quite hard in certain parts of the track, it made it like a skating rink. It was really muddy there for a few minutes.
Yeah. So what they knew was going to happen was we were all saying it was going to be in Sector 3, and Sector 3, of course, is right before the pit lane. So, and Sector 3, as we kind of talked about in our preview, is there's 2 almost 90-degree corners and a chicane before the main straight. So, you're in dry conditions, you're taking that almost flat out until you get to the really slow speed, right? Until you get that chicane right before the pit entry. And it was the McLarens who got there first, because they were in P1 and P2 at the time, and they both went off almost in each other's tracks. And then it was the comeback that actually proved to be pivotal, because Lando got back on the track and found enough grip to get it stopped to get into the chicane, and Piastri went off and instead of coming back off the gravel and onto the track, he goes through some of the grass, picks up some extra water on the tires. So when he hit the track, there was no grip, and he just slid right off the chicane into the grass, which had been collecting water all day long. By some miracle, he manages to find reverse and get it out. But at that point, the entire field has passed him, and he's basically almost a complete and full lap down. So now we're on this is the lap 44 mess that basically turned the entire race on its head. So once Lando had gotten back on, he comes into box, he's going back on to inters. Piastri's still stuck. Meanwhile, everybody else is trying to make decisions, and you've got George Russell, Yuki Tsunoda, and a few others that followed Lando in. And these were the guys who actually ended up making out on the deal, because you still had Max Verstappen staying out. He takes over the lead, and both Ferraris in Hamilton and Leclerc, who's tried to stay out, because the whole part with the shower was it wasn't going to last long. It was going to be quick, intense, and then done. And there wasn't anything behind it. So the home run strategy turned out to be, if you could try to get these tires to the end, you might end up looking like a genius, especially if it doesn't completely coat the track. Well, that didn't happen. The rain had come in, and it was the class 3 that everyone was afraid of. Max eventually does have to pit. And then again, the Ferraris kept him out a second lap. They do get overtaken by Lando. At this point, now we've got, I think it was the Bortoleto spin and the Lawson spin, which causes safety car number 4 on the day. That actually allowed Piastri, who has now gotten going and has changed his tires, to come back around, because all lap cars get to overtake under the safety car. So that kind of brought him, believe it or not, back into the game somewhat, although his chances of winning, which were really good up until that point, were effectively ruined.
Yeah. I feel really bad for Piastri out of this, maybe even worse than Isaac Hadjar, because he looked like he had a legitimate chance at winning that race. And starting off the season with a win, his home win would have been amazing. And there were a couple points before we got to that wet section where he was right on Lando's ass. And it looked like he was going to potentially take the lead. And we got to talk a little bit about the first race of the year team orders that McLaren kind of said that they weren't going to do, and then they looked at the conditions.
The 5-corner team order?
Yeah, they were like, come on, it's kind of wet. Maybe don't race each other right now. We know you look pretty good, Oscar. And they told him, I love that they told him, hey, hold position right now. We're hoping we're going to wait till it gets dry. And Piastri just goes, well, I'm faster, but okay. And yeah, I felt really bad at that point. You could tell that he was probably frustrated because it wasn't like till like another lap or two later, he ended up making like a small mistake and ended up falling a few seconds behind Lando Norris there. And then, who knows how they timed the stuff on the broadcast, but then we hear on the broadcast, okay, now it's okay for you to race. And we're all going, well, of course, now you're going to freaking say that because he's way back behind him.
Yeah.
But
yeah, the actual team order lasted 5 corners because it was as both Lando and Oscar were coming up on the Haas's, and they were going to, now, of course, you were going to have to go offline on worn inter tires to try to make a move. It definitely had hindered Lando because Oscar, you're right, got right up onto his tail. That's when they put the order in. By the time they said free to race, and they reminded, they just reminded both drivers, hey, they said the same thing on both radios. You guys are free to race. Just remember the rules of engagement and go. It was at that point that Oscar had an off on that turn 6 gravel, and that cost him like 3 seconds.
Okay, so that happened.
He fell back.
So that happened after they told them that they could go race.
Correct.
This is why, folks, it's good to listen to the radio for the drivers and watch the onboards
because
you get a different narrative when you watch the broadcast than sometimes what's actually happening. To be fair,
they were definitely trying to play up the whole, they're holding him back narrative. And I'm like, no, that's not what they're doing. I got it in the moment. I wouldn't have said it, but I get it. If they touch and both cars wreck and you get no points out of a race where you could have had potentially 43 points, that's a huge thing to try to deal with. So they were going to let him go. And they did let him go as soon as I think both of them had cleared the blue flag cars. And then it was right after that Oscar had his little moment. And that was kind of leading up to the bigger lap moments. 44 where everybody had the moment.
Going back to that, I do really have to commend Piastri though for not giving up because he looked pretty beached there. Like you could see the tires spinning and you could see him not going anywhere. And I was like, when they went off and he went all the way across and I could see this tire spinning, I was losing my mind because I was thinking, oh my God.
I thought he was done.
They screwed it. They blew it. And, Max was on. So the two of them were on hards, which I thought was really interesting that so many drivers seem to go on the hards because I'm sitting here thinking like it's wet, like off the dry line and it could be getting like rainy here soon. Like, wouldn't you want a softer tire? And that's actually what Max did. He was on the medium, which I think probably helped him as the rain started coming off there. Had maybe a little bit more grip. But yeah, when Piastri was there spinning his wheels in the grass, a lot of drivers probably would have tried that for a minute and given up. And
I almost expected to see the pounding on the steering wheel, and then he hops out of the car.
But no, he managed to get it going. It's like slowly creeping back to the track, which really changed a lot in itself because if he was stuck there, it probably would have gone to probably a full safety car, I would think, with where he was at and the equipment they were going to need to get him. And they kind of seem to not like doing the virtual safety car when it's wet. But I digress. That could have really changed a lot if he had, been stuck and there was a safety car at that point, because at that point, Max was out in the lead with a pretty good gap because he was, braving it on the mediums. he could have maybe made it around, gotten a cheap pit stop for inters, like, a lot of.
Oh, I'll give you even a better scenario. What if they had thrown a red flag?
Oh my God. Yeah, that would have been.
And you had Max, Lewis, Charles all able to come in, change their tires because it was so wet that nobody could run. So if Piastri doesn't do that, and then you had on top of that the Bortoleto spin and the Lawson spin, there's an argument that you could have easily made that could have said they maybe should red flag this. And then we all know what happens when that happens. Y'all get the free tire choice coming out of that. And now you would have had Lando in 6th at that point.
I'm actually happy it didn't go that way because, as we all know, what we said about this, Lando wins the race. And as we're going to get into in a little bit here, I think that's what should have happened. But the chaos kept going. So Max Verstappen goes around a lap on the mediums. And at that point, I'm thinking, like, he should probably get on the inters. Now, they decided to brave it another lap. And that's when Max was like, hey, we really need to make a call here. What am I going to do? They called him in, like, seemingly last minute to get on the inters. And so I thought him staying out 2 laps on mediums was a bold call. The fact that Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton stayed out even longer than that on hards.
Ferrari just said, nuts. Hold my beer.
Yeah. They're going out there and the announcers are going nuts that Lewis Hamilton is leading the race on his debut with Ferrari. And I'm like, yeah, for like 5 seconds, because there's no way he's going to be able to keep going around like that. And yeah, he got passed pretty quick.
Watching it from Lando's onboard, it looked like hot knife through butter type thing. Like, it was just like Lando would go to turn, and then everybody else would just keep sliding off. It was like, well, okay, you got there. And it was right after Lando passed Lewis that they called the safety car. So again, had you gone from safety car to maybe red flag, had Ferrari been able to keep it on the island, so to speak, there was an argument, again, that you could make that if you red flag it there, they could have gotten all that track position. Ultimately, it didn't work. And ultimately, they had to come in and abandon it because there was not going to be a red flag. Mm-hmm. And you have to kind of, at some point, you just have to keep the car on the track. So, they all come in, eventually get inters. That puts them kind of in the back of the queue. Now you've got Piastri circling back around. He rejoins, all on the lead lap now, though. I think it was P13. And then he actually had a moment where he passes Ocon, but it was before the line, so he had to give it back, and he lost like 5 seconds to the drivers in front. And like I said, this is when pissed off Oscar Piastri showed up, because he erased 5 seconds in 2 laps. So, like, you want to talk about there's still potential in that McLaren car? Holy buckets was there potential in that McLaren car. And then again, the move he makes on Lewis at the end, on the outside,
awesome.
There's nobody running that line that he drove. And he could have easily spun off again, but to make it stick and to hold it like he did, early contender for pass of the year. That's what I'm just going to tell you right now.
That was an awesome pass. The fact that Piastri came back to A, stay in the race, and B, get points was highly commendable. So, despite the fact that he was probably really frustrated with, not getting what he deserved out of this race, which was a minimum of a podium, 2nd place, he still did a fantastic job. Ran a great race with the exception of that one very costly mistake. And it's crazy to me here looking at like the list for the midfield here. We've been talking about the midfield so long here. We still got so much to touch on.
We still haven't talked about where did Lance Stroll come from? Where the hell did Alex Albon come from? And how the hell did Kimi Antonelli go from 16th to 4th?
Yeah,
whichever one you want to go for, take it.
Well, before those, since we were talking about the Ferraris and they didn't look super great, I thought we would touch real quick on that Lewis Hamilton radio. It was really a little strange listening to that, because Hamilton and his engineer, Bono from Mercedes, they had been working together for so long. They had a really tight relationship. They could pretty much say whatever they needed to each other, and you could tell that relationship obviously hasn't developed yet between Lewis and his engineer, because his engineer would come over the radio and tell him to do something. And Hamilton was being kind of strangely polite, being like, no, I'm sorry. I'm not at the point where I want to do that. Leave me to it. They were talking about some kind of switch in the car and whatnot. And it seemed very strange because then the engineer would come back on and like give the same instruction, and Lewis would be starting to get frustrated and be like, no, I told you, leave me to it. I know what I need to do, kind of doing a Kimi Räikkönen, like, stop, I know what I'm doing. Just leave me to it. I know what you're asking for. I'll do it when I'm ready. And so I think it's going to take a little while for them to work out those kinks. That's to be expected because they're working together for the first time, really. But
and again, like we kind of said, this is the most stressful type of race environment that you could have asked for on a debut. So I don't think that is a done and dusted thing by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think we're going to be seeing Hamilton coming home in P10 every race, but it was significant that the chemistry still has to, there's still a gelling process that even if you try to dedicate as many hours as Lewis did in the off season, there's nothing, you can simulate everything to the nth degree. There is still no better crucible than a race in order to get it done.
The Kimi Antonelli bit, he had poor qualifying. We didn't really talk too much about his qualifying. Mercedes did some weird stuff in the qualifying with going out on mediums in Q1, which I think contributed to Kimi not being able to set a really, really representative time. So he's starting at the back. He does have a point where he goes off and has a spin during the race. It was in a pretty innocent place because it was a place where there was runoff and plenty of room for him to have that spin, not get any damage, get out on the track. So he lucked out a bit there. But all things considered, he really had a pretty amazing debut to finish. So he finished fourth place on track. He ended up receiving a penalty that put him 5 seconds down and therefore behind Albon. And then that decision was later successfully appealed by the team, who gave, they showed camera footage from, I think, the onboard that I guess it was the release during the safety car. The stewards had ruled that the Mercedes had done an unsafe release and had hindered Nico Hülkenberg from coming back on track. And then when they got the download of all of the onboards that they finally got access to, you could clearly see, if you're looking at Antonelli's onboard, Hülkenberg is not impeded. He's in the slow lane, but he's out, and he managed to get out in front of Antonelli. So where is your unsafe release? Stewards looked at it, ultimately agreed to rescind the penalty, which is something you don't usually see. Normally when we see right of review, I go, oh, that's, dead on arrival. Maybe they'll do a hearing next week and then we'll find out it's dead on arrival. No, this one got sustained and they actually got the result changed. But yes, he ends up having his fourth place finish on track reinstated. And the fact that he got there is really amazing. He ends up finishing behind his teammate, George Russell. So you got Mercedes in third and fourth. And I believe because of that, we'll talk that they're actually tied for first in the points because of all this nuttiness. But he's a rookie out there. He didn't even have any, couple races experience like some of the other rookies did from last year. And he went out there, who mostly kept it on track, and ended up getting a very respectable finish out of it. So, I'm not really sure I'm 100% on the Kimi Antonelli hype train that's going right now, but he definitely impressed a lot more than I was expecting from this race.
Yeah, you definitely see the raw talent. You can understand why Toto Wolff gives him the gleam in the eye. I don't know that I'm fully sold on the kid yet either. I think there's a lot more that we're going to see throughout the course of this season in terms of consistency. And I think that's going to be the thing for all these rookies. I think they're going to show some flash moments, and they're going to show sometimes they're going to look very, very human. I mean, Ollie Behrman last year, great result in the Ferrari in Saudi Arabia. This weekend, I think he wants to forget about this weekend. He wants to get on the plane to China, land in China, and forget about ever touching down in Australia. Because that weekend, it was bad for him. Let's be honest with it. So, yeah, I definitely trial by fire, I think, for a lot of these guys.
And then lastly, as far as Lance Stroll goes, I honestly have no idea, man. I don't know how he got there. He barely had any TV coverage. I didn't even realize that he finished there until after the race was over and I was reviewing the results. It was like, holy crap, where'd he come from? So I guess good race for him. Good points for him.
It was he pitted after Lando did on the same lap, and so did Hulkenberg. And that was the decision that, as it played out, turned out to be the right one. Pitting on lap 44. If you pitted on lap 44, you definitely finished a little bit in front of those who didn't.
Nico Hulkenberg got more points for Kick Sauber in one race than they had last year. Completely. So.
And that money well spent, apparently.
Yeah, that's so. So they're already doing better. Look at that.
Yeah. So, and if that wasn't enough, we still haven't talked about after they went racing, everybody back on inters, because it still wasn't done. Mm-hmm. P3, I didn't see him at all in the race, but, there he was at the end. George Russell in the Mercedes, he gets a podium finish. P2 and P1 went down literally to the end, only 0.8 at the end, separating them. I think Lando Norris had to win this race 4 or 5 separate times, and each time there was the big boss man waiting for him at the end of the level. It's like getting to the end of a video game, and there's that guy again. There he was again. Max Verstappen, despite having an off early, despite getting passed by Oscar Piastri, manages to come home only 0.8 behind in the last 6 laps that were just as crazy as the laps that went before that safety car. Oh my God. Talk about heart attack if you're a McLaren fan. It basically came down to, I think gap was about 1.5 seconds going into the last couple laps, and then Lando had a moment on turn 6. That turn 6 gravel trap caught a lot of people out this weekend, and that enabled Max to get into DRS, and once he was in DRS, he was staying there. At one point, I think on the penultimate lap, it got to within 0.229 on the timing. I was scared out of my mind. I figured, it was going to happen again. We've seen the history, we know the history, but not to be. Maybe this is the start of a different narrative for Lando Norris. I sure as hell hope it is, but he manages to hold him off at the end and take the win. But Max did not make it easy.
No, and I do want to gush about Max here in a minute, but before I do that, I do have to say that I think Lando Norris 100% deserved to win this race. He was pretty much in control of it throughout the entire race. He did have that off in the gravel, but then he ended up recovering to the lead through all that craziness. Max made himself very present throughout this entire race and definitely showed you, as we've discussed many times, that you can never count out Max, because no matter what he's driving, he's going to squeeze something out of it. But Lando had to hold off Oscar Piastri. He had to hold off Max Verstappen several times, and had to deal with Max breathing down his neck at the very end of the race, which would be pretty intimidating, I would think, considering how crazy Max has been in those types of situations before. But yeah, he holds on to the win. I think it was well deserved. It really shows how much skill Lando Norris has. There's been a lot of talk in the media about, is he really ready to make a stronger push for Drivers' Champion? And I think this race really shows that he does have what it takes, that he's able to withstand the pressure. And I think we're going to see great things from him.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like I'm like, oh, thank you. Very well said there. I couldn't agree with you more. I had a very, very healthy respect for actually how both of those guys raced each other. It was clean. It was good stuff. Yeah, it was close, but Max didn't do anything, overly stupid. There wasn't anything wrong with what he did. Lando goes off in the gravel with 2 laps to go, and Max closed up on him. And, it would have taken a Piastri-esque move, I think, at the end, that could have maybe taken both of them out. And I think even Max, I think in the post-race kind of said, you know what, I'm kind of happy with a P2 considering where the car was and where everything else was. And look, I'm going to say some nice things about Max here. He dragged that car to that P2. There was several times where I thought, okay, I can finally start to relax. One was in the first stint, like Max was right on Lando's ass for about the first 15, 20, 25 laps. And then all of a sudden it was like the tires just shut off. And it was like, okay, here's our advantage. We're finally going to open up the gap. And they did. They opened up like a 15-second gap to him. And I'm like, okay, we're fine. Then the Fernando Alonso spin. Then we had the rain thing come. And every time something else got thrown, there was Max right in the background. Here he was again. And that's what champions do. I mean, look, I would have said the same thing if it was Hamilton that would have done the same thing, or anybody else. But that's why he is who he is. This is why it has been his era of these cars, because he's able to do exactly that. And yeah, I mean, like I said, I thought Lando won this thing 4 different times and one more at the end. Mm-hmm. So it was literally like, you couldn't bet against Max 5 times and then once more once he was out of the race, because, oh my God, what a great drive by him. I was very, very impressed, especially considering where that car was in testing, where that car was even on Friday to where it was on Saturday and Sunday. Great recovery.
All right. So now I am going to gush about Max a little bit. He had a great start to the race. He almost looked like he was going to get in the lead. But then, until Lando made the move to block him off, but he still got by Piastri on lap 1. He held on to Lando for as long as he could and looked like he was really struggling with the car to stay close to Lando because the car was wobbling all over the place through the turns. He was really pushing hard to keep it there. At one point, he does have a little bit of a mistake where the car locks up and wet, manages to keep it right from going into the gravel, but he loses the position to Oscar at that point. And I'm thinking, okay, we're going to the McLaren 1-2. Then all that craziness happens. He manages through some pit sequences. And, we're going to preface here that, yes, he was helped out by safety cars. That is just how it goes. That helps him, close up those gaps, despite the fact that McLaren was romping away to an easy 1-2. But they make calls with the different tire strategy. He's on the mediums. He capitalizes when the McLarens have their off. He tries to stay out there on the slicks as the rain's coming down for 2 laps, struggling through that, manages to keep it on the track and still in the lead. Can't do it anymore. Following that craziness, pit sequence and everything, though, and the Bortoleto/Lawson incidents, suddenly we're down to the last few laps, and he's in second place behind Lando. And Lando has to be sitting there looking in his ears going, God damn it, you're back. Why are you here again? And they finally get on that last green flag sequence, and Lando starts to pull away a little bit. And I'm thinking, okay, it's over. He's going to be able to finish in second still, which is way better than what I was expecting before. It did kind of seem to be in 3 tiers at the beginning of the race there. You had the McLarens pulling way out. You had Max keeping up for as long as he could, but then falling off as it seemed that the tires were not working as well on the Red Bull as they were on McLaren. And then a pretty good gap back to George Russell. But so at that point, I'm thinking Max is going to be able to at least hold on to what he's got. But then I'm looking at the timing screen, and all of a sudden it shrinks way back down, and it's under half a second because Lando had that incident that you mentioned before that they didn't show on the broadcast, which is kind of disappointing. They were showing something else, and I'm watching the timing screen, and they went to like some kind of replay, and I was really pissed off because I was like, no, I want to see what's happening at the lead right now. And right after that, the FIA decides, okay, we're good to do DRS again. And
yeah,
at that point, Max,
when I saw that one. I'll admit I about died when I saw that. I'm like, of course they're going to re-enable it with a lap and a half to go.
They probably seeing like, ooh, this could be a spicy situation. Let's make it easier for him to get a pass.
No, it's the right call based on what the conditions were. So I got it. But at the same time, just the timing of it was like, here's one more heart attack. I was like, really? Now? Why? Damn it.
And my heart was like just about beaten out of my chest because, for one thing, we've established many times, big Max fan, nobody thought he was going to come in and win this race. I didn't think he was going to run this race. And yet here we are in the last couple laps, and it's within grasp. And I'm thinking, God, I'm going to go nuts if he somehow pulled this off. And I don't want to see what you're doing if Lando somehow loses this right at the end through some series of like miracles on Max's behalf. But now Lando does manage to hold him off. But Max was right there. I think he finished less than a second behind Lando there at the end.
That was the biggest gap of the whole final lap, by the way. It was right at the end. Because now it was interesting, the strengths of both of their respective cars. And I don't know if Red Bull, I want to say they consciously made this decision in the practices. And for all the talk that sometimes we said that the practices aren't indicative, you could see something with how both of these cars were making their lap times. The second sector, which is pretty much all flat out, I don't know if they, and I want to read in some of maybe the postmortem of this race, it did Red Bull make a conscious decision to take some of the rear wing downforce off because they were flying in the straight lines down into that second sector, where McLaren was making its lap time was in the third sector, and specifically the last couple of corners, because they were pretty much even in the first sector. Red Bull was definitely in front by a couple of tenths in the second sector, and then it was that third sector that the McLarens could keep their tires in it long enough to really make the lap time. So when we were coming out of that second sector, and it's like I said, 0.229, it was all to play for going into that last little bit there.
But it came down much closer than I think anyone was expecting. I'm very happy with what Max managed to get out of this. He got second place in really a race that Red Bull probably had no right getting that second place. And yeah, he was helped by safety cars. He was helped by weather. He was helped by mistakes by, especially the McLaren drivers. But that stuff all happens, and you got to be there to capitalize when that stuff happens. And he was there. So do I think it's going to be a real struggle, even for him to keep up with the McLarens, at least as things look right now? Yeah, that McLaren car looks really, really good. It looked really good in qualifying. It looked really good once that dry line got established and they started pulling out ahead. It looked really easy on the tires. Like they got the car to win right now. And, we were all hoping that this was going to be a really close season between a whole bunch of teams. And I don't know, man, it's only one race that we've seen so far, but I'm not sure that that's the way it's going to be. It's a long season. There's a lot of development, but a lot of people are going to be trying to put attention on the next season at some point. And at that point, if McLaren's still way out in front, a lot of other teams might just be to hell with it. We'll come back next year. So there's a lot to see.
Yeah, I mean, there's my fan part of it that is jumping up and down and doing cartwheels, especially when I saw the qualifying time. And then there's the other part of me that is big picture that also says, I want this to be fun. I don't want it to be, I want a couple of 20-second wins. I'll be honest, but I don't want that all the time. I mean, that's just not fun. It's not fun for anybody. Whether it's
Lando in Great Britain, 30 seconds, fine. That'll do it. Exactly.
I mean, he can finally take that one and, get that, again, monkey off of his back. And if he wants to do that at COTA when I'm going down there in October again, I'm more than happy for that too. Yeah. But other than those two, let's have it at least be competitive and let's be fun. That said, McLaren never makes it easy on themselves. They're going to provide opportunities, I think, throughout the course of this season, just because they do, and because nobody is perfect, even if you have the best car. It's especially in a race like this one, where, again, I keep coming back to any corner could have provided an opportunity to crash at any point for a lot of guys. So I don't know. Yeah, I still want to say that the prognosis on the season is still a little incomplete, but it's definitely leaning McLaren's way early for sure.
Mm-hmm. But despite all that, as we've told you over the course of a while here now, even with McLaren having what seemingly clearly the best car, it still came down to the wire. It was still wildly exciting and probably the best debut race of a season that we've seen in a long time in terms of not being sure what's going to happen.
Yeah, keep having Australia be the opener. Don't. No offense against Bahrain. I'm sure they're nice people and all that other good stuff, but keep Australia as the opener, because this one was a banger.
The under the lights thing in Bahrain, that part's cool. But as far as like the fandom and the interest of the race, I think Australia is the way to go.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, I guess that kind of takes us to the end. I think we've actually got it all in. We're going to take a quick break. We're going to re-rack. We're going to come back. We will tell you what the driver standings have. There is something that has not happened since 2022 that is now a reality. We will also look at where the team standings are. Very, very tight up at the top. In fact, there's no margin up at the top, believe it or not. It's Countback that's setting the order. We will then open it up to your reaction on what you saw in the fan email segment. We've got a lot of our regulars here. We've done a lot of those interactions, and we will get their feedback on the race. We'll hand out some awards, and then we don't have time to rest, because the Chinese GP, believe it or not, free practice 1 is only like 4 days away. So come on back. We're going to get into all that in just a little bit.
You are listening to the Outlap F1 podcast, and we'll be right back after this quick pit stop. Grab your flu powder, broomstick, or apparate to your favorite audio streaming service to join the discussion on Hogwarts, a podcast, where Dan and his friends have in-depth chapter-by-chapter breakdowns of each Harry Potter novel. Join the group as they dive into the magical world and discuss plot points, analyze character development, and occasionally go off the rails. Whether you're a muggle who's new to the series or a pure-blood wizard who won't need a remember-all, Hogwarts, a podcast, brings everyone to the Great Hall for a magical discussion. Hogwarts, a podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, welcome back on in. This is season 7, episode number 3 of the Outlap F1 podcast. It's our 2025 Australian GP review show. You have got Andy, and I'm along with Cody tonight, as always. And we just wrapped up talking about literally a wet and wild Australian GP. What a way to kick off this season. But now that the race is in our rear view, it's time to take a look at where the standings are, including the top 10 of the drivers and the team standings. As always, Cody, if you want to do the drivers, I will handle the teams.
All right. For the first time since May 2022, we have a new leader in the drivers' standings. That leader is Lando Norris, winner of the Australian Grand Prix. He sits atop the standings for McLaren with 25 points. However, Max Verstappen has not gone far. He is second place in the standings for Red Bull at 18 points. George Russell in third place for Mercedes, and then Andrea Kimi Antonelli, also for Mercedes, in fourth place. They're at 15 and 12 points, respectively. Alex Albon had a great showing in Australia. He is in fifth place with 10 points. Lance Stroll coming out of seemingly nowhere, along with Nico Hülkenberg for 6th and 7th for Aston Martin and Kick Sauber, respectively, and at 8 and 6 points. Charles Leclerc, the first of the two Ferrari drivers, is at 8th with 4 points. Oscar Piastri had some poor fortune in this race, but managed to come back to 9th place in the race to get 2 points from McLaren. And then wrapping out the top 10 is Lewis Hamilton, managing to get 1 point in his debut with Ferrari.
Yeah, I have a funny feeling. I don't know if this is going to be the final standings by any stretch of the imagination. I think we're going to see some changes here throughout the course of the season. As for the team standings, it is actually 1 and T1 between McLaren Mercedes and the Mercedes Works team. They are tied on 27 points, with the edge going to McLaren simply because they have the race win. And Mercedes do not at this point. That's it. P2, or I guess now P3, would be Red Bull Racing Powertrains. They come in with 18 points. P4 is Williams. Look at that. They check in with 10 points. P5 is Aston Martin. Thank you, Lance Stroll. They are up to 8 points. P6, Kick Sauber Ferrari, exceeding their entire point total from last year. As you said earlier, Cody, they get 6 points. P7 is Ferrari with 5 points. P8, 9, and 10. Alpine, Racing Bulls, and Haas did not score points in this race, so they are all checking in with 0 points. All right. Well, you've heard our takes on the Australian Grand Prix. Crazy race. I have a funny feeling that this is what we're going to talk about a lot in the fan email segment as well. Cody, as they say, it is your time to shine. We will start with our regular Rachel Fleming, who managed to get, I give her for a lot of credit. This was a tough race if you were in the UK to wake up for. I think the pre-race started at 2:30 in the morning. We were staying up late. You had to get up early for this one. Now, it's going to get flipped around for us for China, because I think that race starts at 2 a.m. for us. But anyway, never going to sleep again, apparently. But Cody, tell us Rachel's thoughts on the race.
All right. As you said, our first email comes in from Rachel. Thank you, Rachel. And she says, well, that was a great race, wasn't it? Lando was brilliant throughout and deserved that victory. He kept his cool throughout and soaked up the pressure. Brilliant drives from George Russell and, in particular, Alex Albon. That Williams looks good. Exciting times for them. Kimi was best of the rookies, but Ollie Behrman didn't go off either, so credit must go out to them both. No Perez watched this year for obvious reasons. Nope. Though I was disappointed that there wasn't an episode called I Have a Contract. I have introduced Alonso Watch. Oof. He crashed, though he wasn't the only one. Sauber Watch. Nico already has got Sauber off the mark for points, 7th. No need to worry about that this season. Bortoleto was one of many who went off, but it looked like something failed on the car first. And then she says, finally getting up at 4 a.m. in the UK was worth it. What a great race to kick off 2025. And since I sent this message, Kimi has 4th place back and Albon is 5th. Still far better than the Ferraris. Welcome to a world of pain, Lewis. Yeah, a lot of things there. Good on you for getting up that early. I'm not a morning person. I'm going to have a hell of a time in China. Probably have to go to bed at like 5 in the afternoon. But yeah,
power nap.
A lot of good things touched on here. George Russell had a pretty quiet drive, I would say, but very good nonetheless. That Mercedes looks decent, if a ways off from the McLaren, and I think from the comeback drive that Antonelli made, I think we're going to see some good competition between the two of them, which would be pretty cool. Oliver Behrman was going to be kind of screwed in this race no matter what, because that Haas did not look good for this track. They did not look really good at any point during this weekend, and they were pretty much only finishing 13th and 14th due to attrition. But he did keep it on the track, which is more than could be said about other sessions that he had this weekend. So we'll take that as an improvement. Alonso Watch is bold. I hope we don't have to cue that one up too much this season. But yes, he did have his own off this race. And honestly, he was running like 9th to 10th at some when that happened.
It was on the fringes of the points.
So I guess that's to say that the Aston Martin isn't maybe as god awful as people were expecting coming into this first race. He was running in the points. His teammate Lance Stroll actually managed to get a pretty decent haul of points. Whatever happened during the race that allowed that to happen. So good on him for that. And yeah, Sauber Watch isn't going to be as dreadfully painful as it was last year, because they already got more points than they had last year. And I think Bortoleto is actually going to be pretty fun to watch. I think he's got a lot of talent. He made it through most of the race before he had that off, and he was doing okay up to that point. He had pretty good qualifying. He made it out of Q1 in Sauber, which we were all expecting to be the worst car. So, I think he's going to be really fun to watch.
Yeah, I mean, Alonso Watch has the potential to be actually very, very spicy. I don't know if you got a chance to see his Friday interview where he showed up, he's wearing his sunglasses, and he said, I'm required to be here. There's going to be 24 Fridays, and I'm not going to tell you anything about the car on all of the 24 Fridays. We went out, we made laps, We did things, we tried setup, and that's all I have to say. And then he turned around and he walked out. So
that's Alonso trying to keep his job.
Yeah, the ticking time bomb is there, and it's all there for you. So Rachel, that's impressive if you're going to get through that. Let's put it that way. I'll be watching for when the time bomb goes off, because it's just waiting until 26, I think, at this point for Fernando.
Keep it 200.
Yeah, exactly. In terms of the rookies, Kimi Antonelli obviously was the best of them, and Ali Behrman finished, which was more than other guys did. We did talk about that. Very impressed with what Alex Albon did in the Williams, and also got to be impressed with George Russell coming home P3. You know, in all of the chaos, I don't recall him having an off. He was one of the few that I didn't see having major issues. So just being there and being part of the equation is probably the best thing for where Mercedes are right now. And if they can bring some development to that car, they can maybe step up and get in the fight a little bit more. But they were clearly the better of the two. What we were thinking were the 2A and 2B teams between Ferrari and Mercedes. Clearly, Mercedes got the better of them here. We shall have to see what the response is come China and come some of these other places. I mean, we talked about the Lando and Max going around and in up and around each other throughout the whole course of this race. I do think, I really do hope that this is the beginning of a narrative shift around Lando a little bit, that he can do it. I think the fact that he led from pole, got through the first corner, there were no issues. Like I said, I think he had to win this race like 3 or 4 separate times, and each time he got it done. Wasn't always the prettiest, but he got it done. And I think that's what counts in the end. Rachel, thank you very much. As always, we've got another regular here, Dave Doherty. Cody, what's he got to say?
All right, Dave says, "Hi team, F1 is back, and what a great way to do it. McLaren, they look so positive and powerful. Do you think that McLaren and Lando will lead this championship, or I'm maybe guessing win this championship? As for Max, it's good to see that he's still around. As we know, Max DNF'd here last year. Max actually did mention that during his interview. He said, well, this is 18 more points than I got last year, so I'll take it, which is a pretty positive thing to come out with. Then Dave says, the championship looks interesting between McLaren and Red Bull. I'm happy that Mercedes, parentheses George, had a good start, P4 in quality and P3 in the race day. Wow. And how good is the F1 TV app on the phone? It has given me all the information of the race. I've used the F1 TV phone app many a time when I didn't have my computer available, and it actually works quite well. I'm pretty impressed. And as I've told Andy here, they finally have an F1 TV app for my TV, so I don't even have to go through all this crap with hooking up my TV or my computer to the TV to get that up where I want to watch it. But yeah, the championship looking interesting between McLaren and Red Bull, maybe for now, or I would maybe tone that back a little bit to McLaren and Max for the moment. George did have a good start. I would also extend that Mercedes happiness to Antonelli, despite the fact that he had poor qualifying, which was kind of partly out of his control. We saw it was something we didn't really talk about during the qualifying segment, that he had a small off near that gravel trap, but it really wasn't that bad considering what a lot of other drivers were doing at that same part in the track when they were pushing, and yet he got some kind of damage on the floor of his car. It was sparking really bad through the rest of that lap. That probably had an impact on his lap time. On top of that, Mercedes was apparently trying to save soft tires potentially for the race that they never used or something, and they went out in Q1 mediums, which was a bold call, but he had an awesome recovery drive. So I would say that I'm happy that both Mercedes drivers had a good start to the season. Let's hear Max. Yep, he is still around. I don't think he's going anywhere anytime soon. If he thinks that he can drag that car to another driver's championship, by God, he's going to do it. But he's got a lot of work to do that because the McLaren car looks very strong. Lando and Oscar Piastri both look very confident in their ability to wheel it around to a win. I think we're going to see a lot of wins from both of them this year. As far as I'm concerned, do I think that McLaren and Lando will lead the championship, as in win it at the end? I think that it is a very, very, very good chance. I think there's going to be a good battle between Lando and Oscar. We'll have to see where this development race goes, because it can go in a lot of different directions here, especially considering the resources that are going to need to be allocated to developing next year's car with the new regulations. I'm sure a lot of teams are already putting all of their focus on that. I think teams that think they've got a shot this year, like Red Bull and Ferrari, and Mercedes, will develop their car for a while. But if McLaren can keep their development out in front, if they can keep their car very strong despite the upgrades that other guys are bringing, I think eventually they're going to have to give up. So I do think that there is a really good chance of both of them winning the championship.
Yeah, I mean, the other part of this that I'm going to just remind everybody is, remember that big technical directive is going to kick in after Spain, and if and we don't know, and I've read a lot about Rob Marshall and the FlexiWing thing. Is it a huge advantage? Is it just enough to make the car more stable? Yeah, it's tough to tell, and we're going to find out. I mean, the fact of the matter is, if they are playing games with FlexiWings, they're not going to be able to post Spain. So it's going to be interesting to see. Do we have one running order pre-Spain and then a separate running order after that? And then where does it go? And then who throws what at what development? Because you're already a third of your year in. I would say, at least for the first 4 or 5, certainly for these flyaway races, I think until they maybe get to somewhere like Bahrain, I definitely think McLaren will have the advantage. But I do think if you're going to see any development, you're going to see it probably even starting there, because it's a lot closer to these teams' home bases. They're used to shipping stuff there, and you can get parts from your factory into Bahrain a lot easier than you can necessarily some other places. I don't think you're gonna see a lot of the same pecking order. Maybe Ferrari get back up there a bit. I think you're going to see a lot more of your testing pecking order in China. It's a Tilke circuit, just kind of like Bahrain is a Tilke design circuit. I think you're going to see a lot more straightforward weather. I don't believe there's a chance for any rain yet. I haven't looked at the long-term forecast, but I will do so. So I think your first maybe 2-3 races are going to be, pretty similar in terms of that. After that, it's going to come down to who wants to develop. And like you said, who's going to put chips in for 25 versus, calling it a day and going for 26. So yeah, we'll run round in, and with 23 races to go, it's a long time. There could be a lot of things that change between now and then. But yeah, as a McLaren fan, it's definitely fun to see advantage early, at least for sure.
I would not be surprised to see Red Bull continue to develop the car throughout the season. I think I would say that there's a good chance that this is just like 2013, where this could be the twilight of their successful years, potentially for a while. And I think they're going to do what they can to try to get a 5th consecutive driver's title for Max, because it's only ever been done once before.
Yep.
And I think that if they can get that accolade, I think they're going to go for it. So I wouldn't be surprised to see them developing well into the year. I'm also of the opinion that McLaren looks so good. I don't think that the FlexiWing thing is all that's making that car good. Like, I think that, yeah, maybe it'll be a lot closer when those additional tests come into play, starting with the beginning of the second third of the season. But I think we're still going to see them out in front, because there's other teams that have developed FlexiWing stuff as well, and they're not looking nearly as good as that McLaren. So they've got probably a pretty good all around package going. But I do hope that it tightens up. Hopefully even before we get to Spain.
Well, yeah, again, these are things that we're going to have to see. I certainly did not. I think to your point about Red Bull, I think is actually really spot on, because I don't think I had 15 updates on their sheet as part of my prep for this weekend. And there it was, all of a sudden Friday practice rolls around and they show the report, and Red Bull's got 5 pages of stuff that they brought and did a whole lot of testing. So they are definitely trying to weed out a lot of what this car is. And they made a ton of progress in one weekend. So they are doing everything they could. And you could see, it's almost role reversal go back to like 2023 and the race I remember in Hungary, where Max ended up winning by like 20 seconds over Lando. But it was always in the first part of the stint, Lando could stay with Max. And then as the stint just wore on, Max just was able to eke out lap time, lap after lap after lap. It's kind of the reverse scenario now, where Lando's able to do that and Max is the one dragging it. And what we kind of saw, we did kind of see the tipping point where the tires just, shut off on the Red Bull and they just couldn't keep the performance up. But to their credit, I thought they kept the performance up a lot longer than I think anybody had anticipated going into this weekend. So I don't think we're done by a long shot. We got a long, long way to go. All right. Well, thank you to everybody who participated in the fan email segment. We do love, always chiming in and reacting to your thoughts on what you guys saw this weekend. Thank you, Dave, for hopping on Blue Sky and promoting a lot of our stuff. That was awesome. So we're literally building that following from zero. So we appreciate all of the help and the support that you brought over the course of the weekend. So special shout out to Dave there. All right. So we will now transition into our awards, and we shall start, as we are apt to do, with the rubbish. I will go first here. It's not, I don't have a mad rubbish, like I'm really upset about anything, but I am going to kind of give this one to the home American team Haas, because I guess now we know why they were afraid to do any quali runs, because that looked painful. And if they don't want to develop a lot into this 2025 car, they could be one of the first ones that I think just kind of say, you know what, let's just focus on 26. And it could be a very long year for Esteban Ocon and Ollie Behrman, unless it gets better and gets better fast, because from what I saw, it looked painful. Yikes. Cody, what you got?
It's weird for Haas how it seems like year on year you don't know what you're going to get. Last year they looked pretty good. Like they were in position to finish sixth in constructors, and that only didn't happen because of that crazy Alpine double podium. And then this year now they're back to being comfortably the worst, at least in this first race. So who knows? For my rubbish award, same as you, I don't think I clearly had a very strong opinion for rubbish this weekend, especially considering this was a really hard race, as we discussed. So it's kind of hard to put too much blame on a lot of the rookie drivers. I am, however, going to pick Liam Lawson as my rubbish award, and that's because, for one, he didn't finish the race. Two, he's in the Red Bull now, which is, probably still a pretty tricky car to drive, but it is, from what we saw from Max, one of the stronger cars on the grid, and his qualifying performance was pretty bad. And we go back to this; it's the first race weekend for him in a new car, but he did have a little bit of show from last year. He participated in a good chunk of the season last year in a worse car and showed pretty well. At least, from what we can tell, it was a worse car. Now that our Racing Bull actually looks pretty nice, but I digress. He's got some experience, and he did not look good. The qualifying session was dry. It was hot, and this track is unforgiving for qualifying, because if you mess up at certain parts of the track, you end up in a gravel trap, and you're just kind of screwed. But he didn't even make it out of Q1. So I'm hoping that this is kind of a blip, and that he'll get a better hold on that car. I wouldn't go, I'm giving him my Rush Award, but I wouldn't go as far as what a lot of people have been saying on social media, which is that he's washed, he's awful, they should have given the seat to Tsunoda. I'm not ready to make that leap yet. Yes, Tsunoda is a more proven talent, and to what it's worth, Yuki Tsunoda had a pretty darn good weekend this weekend. He had very good qualifying, was in position to actually finish in the points, and it just didn't really go his way. But there's reasons they don't want to put him in the Red Bull, and there's got to be, because they would have done it by now. So
yeah, I mean,
I'm really, yeah.
They definitely, the whole point of why Lawson is in that seat is because they need that second seat to be scoring points. They need that second seat to be in the mix. And for whatever reason, unfortunately, he just wasn't. And look, I'm not ready to put anybody into a coffin and call it a career or any of that. And I think the people who were kind of doing that, we just love to make quick and rash decisions in the F1 fandom sometimes. I'm going to give him a break, but he knows it's got to be better. I think if you talk to him, I'm pretty sure the first thing out of his mouth was, I have to be better. He knows that. I'm hoping that, he's going to have hopefully a good amount of runway to try to prove it. We're going down to a track that he should know a little bit. In China, they don't run there a lot, but that's, then he's kind of on par with everybody else. So, and it's going to be a sprint weekend next weekend. So, you could just as easily bounce back really quickly. So we're going to have to see but to your point, the spotlight is already shining very quick, very hard and bright on one Liam Lawson, and he's got to respond, and he's got to do it quickly.
I'm hoping that Red Bull is kind of going a little bit away from the just canning drivers left and right. They did hold on to Perez for a very long time, despite rocky performance, and he had the backing to go with that. But I do hope that they give Liam enough time to actually prove what he's got, instead of switching things around and putting Isaac Hadjar in the car halfway through the season when he's not ready. I think that it could be really messy. So I think they just leave him in the car, let him get used to it, let him show that he can do better. And they go from there.
I'm with you, but at the same time, these are all guys that owe their careers to Helmut, and Helmut doesn't have a whole lot of patience. And that's always the worry. That's always the worry. That was the one thing that I always said was different about Perez, was he didn't owe Helmut Marko a thing. Helmut could say whatever the hell he wanted, and Sergio was his own made guy. Ian Lawson's not a made guy. So we're going to find out. But I hope he is strong enough. I think of the whole crop, I always thought he was the best one of them in terms of talent. So it's got to come to the forefront. We're going to watch. That's what's going to make it fun. All right, so we will move into analysis paralysis. With a race like this, the calls mattered, and the calls mattered early and late. So I'm going to go, I guess I'll go first on this one, and I'm going to give this one out to Ferrari just because they went for the home run. I got it. I understood it. But oh, how you struck out when you went out one more lap too much. Had you just followed Max in, I think you would have been happier with the result. But I understood why they went for it, because they had no other real chance to get up there. And for a fleeting minute, as all the announcers said, Lewis Hamilton was in the lead of an F1 race and debut for Ferrari.
Yep. That was fun for all of 5 seconds.
3 quarters.
Yep, exactly. My analysis paralysis is going to go to Haas, and that's because I think they had the chance to make an actual working home run play, where they didn't pit with everybody else to go to the slicks. Everyone knew the rain was coming. As I said before, I thought Haas was going for some crazy strategy where they're like, you know what, we're going to try to make these inters work for a little longer, and then we'll be, we're going to get a little bit of track position from everyone else pitting under the safety car. We're going to maybe fall back a little bit here, but then we're going to be in great position when that rain actually comes. And they might have been. But after they didn't pit with everyone else for slicks, then before we moved back to green flag racing, they went in anyway and lost all that track position that they might have gained, and then they were screwed on slicks just like everybody else. So I feel like they were maybe it almost seemed to me like they were going to go for that strategy, and then they thought differently of it and bailed. And to me, that is the definition of analysis paralysis.
Yeah, I mean, it would have been a very interesting thing to see if they'd been able to actually hang it out, because inters on a drying or dry track tend to turn into slicks. You know, we've seen that before. Look at the Lewis Hamilton.
Immediate.
Yeah. Look at the Lewis Hamilton Turkey tire, circa 2020, where there was no tread on it, and it was basically just a thing of rubber, looking more like a slick. So even had it rained again, the question would have been, had those inters had anything left to actually keep those cars on the track? But I was with you. In the moment, I was like, okay, I get what you're doing. You're waiting to see if the rain comes. They got the rain that they would have looked for, but yet when the safety car had come out, they all bailed and they went to slicks. So I was, at the time, I was totally where you are on this. I'm like, I'm not understanding what they were doing. But I didn't get a chance to hear the radio.
Or they weren't going to get points going the slick strategy. Right. So unless we had a lot more retirements. So to me, it made sense to just like, well, the Haas does that all the time. They're like, well, let's throw this at the wall and see what happens. And yeah, they didn't go with it for some reason.
Would have been more interesting had they thrown full wets on.
Ooh, yeah, it could have. Maybe.
You never know. I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I think at the end when it was drying back out, because that rain stopped. But in those couple laps, boy, could you imagine where they might have gotten to in those couple laps before it started to dry out again? But anyway, what could have been? So we will move into our dark horse of the day. Cody, I'll let you go first on this one. Who you got?
I'm going to go for a twofer on the dark horse. I'm going to go with Lance Stroll and Nico Hülkenberg, because they, in my opinion, pretty much came from nowhere. Really benefited from that really rocky lap, 44 craziness with everyone being on slicks and going for the inters. They pit for inters at an opportune time, and putting them in position to finish well in the points in 6th and 7th place for Stroll and Hülkenberg respectively. So I really did not see, especially a Kick Sauber in the points in 7th place, and the Aston looked pretty poor in testing. I don't think we were really expecting too much from them either. So definitely my dark horses.
All right. I'm going to give my dark horse out to Alex Albon and the Williams. And if Carlos Sainz managed to get in the points, I probably would have given this to him, because that Williams does not look like a mirage. You could have looked at the testing and said, well, they were the only one to run a C4. It was a glory run, low fuel, da-da-da-da-da. Why are they leading sessions? Apparently this is real, because at least certainly in free practice, when it was dry and the conditions were really known, both Williams were in the mix, like P5, P6, P7. They have definitely made a step, and a significant one from where they were last year to this year. The form looks legit. The Carlos Sainz effect seems to be real. The James Vowles effect seems to be real. And that is elevating Alex Albon to do better. So all of the components that you want in a race team appear to be happening kind of almost in front of our eyes. The question is, how far can they take it? How far? What I'm so fearful of with Williams is that they're going to show great early in the early rounds, and people are just going to outdevelop them because they have already said that they're going to go more into 2026 than they want to do with this car. But you almost then have to go, well, James, come on, you got to give some resources to this car because you're doing so well. So
it will make more money.
Yeah, exactly. And God knows they could use it. And again, here's another race where they had to put together another wrecked car. That poor tub of Carlos Sainz has been wrecked so many times. It's really, really tragic. But, oh, man. But again, on a good note, that form looks legit. Let's hope that car does some real good things. I'm interested to see what they do in China. All right. And so last award is our driver of the day. Cody, I'll let you go first. Who you got?
It's got to be Lando He, as we discussed, had to win this race many times, and he withstood the pressure. He withstood pressure from his teammate, from Max on the track. He withstood the pressure of a wet track, changing conditions, having his own off into the gravel, made a comeback from that, and held off Max once again at the end of the race when Lando was driving with what apparently was a pretty damaged floor from his cruise through the gravel. So he had to stand up to monumental pressure this race, and he did it. And now he can say that he is the points leader to start off this season.
All right, for my driver of the day, I felt he had to win this race 4 or 5 different times, and somehow he managed to pull it off. Lando Norris, I really do hope this is the beginning of a turn. It's one of those drives that if you win it, can be career changing. I don't want to get ahead of myself. There's a long way to go. He hasn't won any sort of championships or anything like that yet, but this is one of those things that in between the years is significant, I think, for him, like I have seen him progress throughout his career. So he gets my nod for driver of the day. All right. So before we hop on out, we will now take a look at the predictions, and the rain threw our predictions a bit for a loop. I think that's pretty fair. Cody, you finished the weekend with 2 points. We did manage to nail the qualifying, though, pretty good. You got the pole sitter. You had Lando there, and your lap time was actually really, really close to on it. I think it was a 1:22.6 versus a 1:22.1, so that's only a half a second off there. So you get the overall lap point. It came down to the prop bet, as it turned out. I finished with 3. I got the pole sitter. I had the quali time because it was faster than you, and both Lando and Oscar went faster than both of us thought when they pulled that last lap time out of the bag there. So that surprised, I think, both of us there. And I got the prop bet because it came down to Jack Doohan. Once he wrecked, that was pretty much the end of it. The safe bet that we all had was Oscar Piastri was going to score points, and then almost that didn't happen. So it just goes to show what we thought about going into this race and what actually happened. Turned out to be very, very, very different. But so I guess I get a early 1-0 lead after one round. All right. Well, that wraps up a enthralling and very fun and nerve-wracking, all the emotions, Australian Grand Prix weekend. This is only one of 24. We get to turn around and do this all again next weekend. The Chinese Grand Prix awaits. It's a sprint weekend on top of that. So we have all sorts of fun, a lot of sessions, not a lot of practicing to talk about. So we're going to be here to try to cover it all. Cody, any final thoughts on this first weekend of the season?
If McLaren has to win every race this year, I hope that they're all as exciting as this one.
All right, fair enough. I am still, the inner part of me is jumping up and down, but I'm still holding back just a little bit because I've seen bad things happen. But anyway, we will be here to cover it all. We're going to try to get our preview done Wednesday, get you all psyched for the Chinese Grand Prix weekend. Stay tuned to us on social media if news breaks between now and then. Blue Sky, Twitter, those are going to be the main sources to find our stuff there. So thank you very much for joining us. And as always, folks, may all your laps be fast.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Outlap F1 podcast. If you like what you heard, click that subscribe button and be sure to leave us a 5-star review. If you want to connect with us outside of the show, check out our website at www.outlapf1.com. Find us on Twitter and Instagram at OutlapF1 Podcast, or email us at chatnow@outlapf1.com. As always, thank you so much for your support, and we'll see you on the next one.